Today I'm going to be sharing with you some tips on how to make your bedroom more aesthetic. And even though we're talking about the bedroom specifically, you can really use these pointers in any room of your house. They'll work just fine. If you look up the word aesthetic and you try to find the definition for it, you're going to find something similar to the concern of beauty or the appreciation of beauty. And because of that, when people think that an item is aesthetic, they think that an item or space is simply pretty. And because of that, if you are to look up how to decorate your house or your room in an aesthetic way, you're going to find a bunch of articles with do-it-yourself projects that involve things like hanging clusters of ornaments from the ceiling or pinning lights across walls, creating poster walls, or maybe tapestries hanging from the ceiling. These items can definitely have a place within an aesthetic setup, but at the same time, they also distract a person from the bigger picture. My personal opinion is that people get carried away with how many shiny or interesting objects they can place into a room, while simultaneously forgetting the major factors that actually make a space aesthetic. If being aesthetic is having beauty, and beauty is determined by the eyes of the observer, then it would make sense that in order to increase aestheticism, we have to make a space as visually appealing as possible. And what makes something visually appealing to the human mind? The answer is balance, symmetry, contrast, and harmony. So now that you understand the direction which I'm taking this, here's the first tip: balancing visual weight. Visual weight is what your eyes subconsciously believe different items within a room to weigh. If you can incorporate this correctly into your room, your bedroom will look better than 90% of the bedrooms out there. Here's how to understand visual weight. Your eyes are seeing 6 different things. They're seeing size, shape, proximity, color, texture, and grounding. Size. The larger an item is, the heavier it appears. For shapes that are more common, like rectangles and squares, our mind perceives as heavier than irregular or wavy shapes with curves and unexpected angles. Proximity. A heavy furniture piece will be perceived as having a lot of visual weight standing alone. But if you surround it with some other pieces, its visual weight will become lighter. Color. Lighter items will be viewed as having less weight than darker items, which are actually the same size. The next 2 are not as apparent, but your subconscious mind definitely recognizes them. The first of those being texture. When textures create different shadows or depths, they make an item feel heavier. So for example, if you had 2 different bookcases, one of which had deeper shelves, the one with deeper shelves would feel as though it was heavier, because within those shelves, you'd likely have darker shadows, and those darker shadows would tell your mind this is a heavy item. And finally, grounding. You could have 2 of the exact same couch sitting next to each other. The one that's laying flush on the ground would appear much heavier than one that might have small little feet or legs at the bottom of it, allowing light to travel under. The lower an item is to the ground, the heavier it will appear. Moving on, symmetry. Creating symmetry is about having a focal point. Lucky for you, we're talking about bedrooms. So the focal point is your bed, and you're going to want to build around that. Keep things symmetrical while still using different pieces. It's not completely offensive when people have 2 of every item in the same room, but it's somewhat offensive. Here's what you see a lot of: 2 of the same nightstand on each side of the bed, 2 of the same table lamps on each side of the bed, 2 of the same chairs on each side of the bed. These setups make me feel like I'm on the floor of a furniture store and I don't want to live there. You might be asking yourself, well, then what do I do? Well, the answer is that you return to point number 1, which is balancing visual weight. And what you'll also want to incorporate is balancing heights. You would like to have items of similar heights on opposite sides of the room to balance out what the eye sees on the horizon. Here are some things that you'll want to remember. Have the right size furniture for your room. If your room is smaller, you shouldn't have oversized dressers, chests, or ottomans. You'll want to scale down to different types of pieces that are lighter in weight. On the same note, if you have a larger room, you'll want larger pieces because anything else will feel dwarfed and the room will feel bare and cold. Secondly, color and texture balance. Adding hints of color to a room is a great idea. At the same time, you'll want to distribute the color evenly within your room rather than bunching together multiple pieces of the same color. Let's say you have a dark green chair in one corner of your room. Well, then maybe you might want to put a decorative fig tree on the opposite side of the room. They both share the same color, and placing them in different areas of the room is going to help balance the impact of that color within the room. As for texture, maybe on the same chair you have a fluffy or furry pillow. Well, then you might want to consider having a textured throw laid across your bed. Again, balancing the room by separating items which have similar traits. Here's a side note. Have a consistent color palette when designing your room. Nobody wants to enter a room and feel like they jumped into a bag of Skittles. My favorite is to pick 4 or 5 colors that will be used in a room. Only 1 or 2 of those will really have real color saturation, and they're used sparingly, meaning things like red, bright blue, green, etc. The other colors would be a combination of neutrals and naturals, black, white, gray, wood, metal, that type of deal. The combination of those will balance each other out, and they will prevent one another from becoming too overwhelming. Thirdly, add contrast. It makes things interesting. This could mean placing a geometric pattern on top of a solid, or placing black against white. It could also be having smooth surfaces placed against rough surfaces. Accessories. Remember that accessories are the final touch. And at the beginning of this video, I mentioned that people get carried away with creating items of beauty and seeing how many they can place into a room. They treat these items as a priority when in reality, they are simply the icing on a cake. But when you've completed the other things I've mentioned and you have a great foundation, that's when you're ready to incorporate those dream catchers hanging from the ceiling, or strings of lights, or any ceramics that you might want in your room. So far, we've only talked about what to put in your room, but what you do not have in your room is equally as important. The majority of bedrooms are one thing, cluttered, and that by itself can make a room off-putting. Negative space is your friend, and your furniture needs room to breathe. Just because you have an open space in your room does not mean it needs a decoration within it. Finally, stick to the plan. You may have a million different ideas of what you'd like to incorporate into your bedroom, especially if you're a person with eclectic taste. But what you'll want to do is stick to 2 or 3 main concepts and just roll with those. Anything much more than that, and your room is going to become chaotic and uncomfortable, which is the complete opposite of creating an aesthetic space. Hopefully this helps. If you like this video, there's a thumbs up down below it. Hit that. And if you want to, hit subscribe.